The number 157. That is how many fortified cities and fortresses a single man destroyed in less than 20 years. Not captured, not bypassed, smashed into rubble, burned to the ground, erased from the map. The man's name was Genghis Khan, and the world he inherited was a patchwork of stone walls, iron gates and towers that had never fallen. By the time he was done, those walls were just gravel under the hooves of his horses. If you've ever sat through a history class wondering why they only teach you about the Mongols as screaming barbarians on horseback, you're about to get the real story. The textbooks love the romantic image of the steppe warrior, leather armor, curved bows, a wild charge across an open field. They never show you the logistics, the siege engineers, the floating bridges and the catapults that could hurl jars of burning tar 300 yards. The Mongols weren't just good at war. They were the most adaptable military machine the medieval world had ever seen, and their secret weapon had nothing to do with horses. It was a siege tower. Specifically, it was a Chinese siege tower. Genghis had never seen one when he first rode out of the Mongolian plateau in the year 1206. His world was open grass, wind, and the constant movement of herds. Fortresses were something that happened to other people. Then he hit the western Xia kingdom, and he hit their stone walls, and he bounced right off them. For the first time in his life, a direct charge did not work. The fortress did not collapse because he wanted it to. That moment is the crack. That is the evidence that does not fit the official story of the unstoppable barbarian, because Genghis Khan did not get angry, did not throw his army at the walls until they died. He stopped. He looked at the problem, and he realized his entire way of fighting was a dead end against a stone curtain wall. So he did something almost no other conqueror in history would do. He adopted the technology of his enemy. He took Chinese siege engineers. He took Persian technicians. He took Arab mathematicians who understood angles and leverage better than any general in Europe. And he put them all into a single mobile army that could build a trebuchet, basically a giant slingshot, out of local timber in 2 days. That is not a barbarian. That is a project manager. You just saw the hidden key to Genghis's success. Not savagery, but adaptability. If you want to uncover more moments where history's greatest conquerors surprise you with their actual strategies, subscribe to this channel. We dig past the textbook gloss and show you the real machinery of war. And in the comments, tell me, did you expect to call Genghis Khan a project manager? Drop your reaction below. I want to know if that changed how you see him. Now here is where things get interesting. Because Genghis did not just copy Chinese siege tactics, he improved them. The Chinese had giant traction trebuchets that needed 200 men pulling ropes to launch a single stone. The Mongols took that design and replaced the human muscle with a massive counterweight, a box filled with rocks or earth that swung down with crushing force. That counterweight trebuchet could hurl a 300-pound stone further and more accurately than anything the Chinese had ever built. It could also throw diseased animal carcasses over the walls, starting plagues inside the city before a single Mongol set foot near the gate. But the technology was only half the story. The other half was the promise. Genghis Khan offered every city a choice. Surrender, pay tribute, and your people live. Your religion stays intact. Your markets keep trading. Fight, and you will be annihilated to the last child. It was a brutal calculation, but it was also a rational one. Most cities that surrendered kept their economies running, and Genghis got the tribute. The ones that resisted, they became the warning for the next city. The chroniclers who watched the sieges noted that the smoke from a conquered city could be seen on the horizon for days before the army even arrived at the next wall. And this is where the discomfort starts to settle in. Because if you strip away the romantic image of the Mongol horde, the screaming riders, the swift horses, the leather armor, what you are left with is a cold, efficient, data-driven machine. Genghis Khan treated each fortress like a problem to be solved. He weighed the wall height against the available timber. He counted the defenders against his own manpower. He calculated how long it would take to build the siege works and whether the season allowed for a prolonged blockade. Every fortress was a math problem, and he never stopped solving. You think you know this story. You have seen the movies. The Mongols are the wild, untamed enemy that the civilized world must unite against. But the reality is far more uncomfortable. Genghis Khan out-engineered every civilization he faced. He out-logisticized armies that had been fighting from stone castles for generations. He created a communication network using relay stations called YAM, messenger posts spaced a day's ride apart, that could carry an order from Korea to Hungary in under 2 months. That is faster than most European kings could get a letter from their own capital to their border garrison. So the next time you see a stone wall, remember what the Mongols proved. Every fortress has a weakness. The question is whether you have the patience to find it and the adaptability to build the tool that exploits it. Genghis had both, and that is why his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. A span of history that still echoes in the ruins of 157 fortresses that tried to stop him and lost. If you have ever felt the weight of that truth in your hands, you understand something most people never will. Fortresses are not built to last. They are built to be tested. And in our next episode, we will examine the one fortress that broke that pattern. The one wall that refused to fall. The fortress that Genghis Khan himself could never crack. And why? Because some stones hold secrets that even the greatest siege cannot unlock. Stay sharp. The dust has not settled yet. The Mongol siege of Baghdad in the year 1258 was the ultimate test of that system. The city was the jewel of the Islamic world, a round metropolis ringed by massive walls and a deep moat, defended by the Abbasid Caliph, a man who believed his city had never fallen and never would. The Caliph had seen other cities fall, of course. He had heard the stories of the smoke on the horizon, but he assumed his walls were different, his moat deeper, his army more loyal. He was wrong about all three. When the Mongol army under Hulagu, Genghis's grandson, arrived at the gates, they did not charge. They did not even attempt a direct assault. Instead, they did what Genghis had taught them. They built a wall around the entire city, a perimeter of earth and timber that cut off all supply routes. Then they built the trebuchets, not one or two, hundreds. The chroniclers who watched the siege described the sky growing dark with stones, each one heavier than a man, crashing into the walls with a rhythm that sounded like thunder that never stopped. The moat was filled with debris and bodies within 3 days. The Caliph watched from his palace tower as his invincible fortress turned into a coffin. He had gold, enough gold to fill a treasury that had taken centuries to accumulate. He offered it all to Hulagu in exchange for mercy. The Mongol commander looked at the gold, looked at the nearly broken walls, and said something that has echoed through history. You had the gold. You could have paid the tribute, kept your city, and your people would have lived. You chose to fight. Now the gold is mine, and you will have nothing. When the walls finally collapsed, the Mongols did not stop at the treasury. They burned the House of Wisdom, the greatest library in the world at the time, throwing thousands of manuscripts into the Tigris River. The water ran black with ink before it ran red with blood. The Caliph was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. A deliberate humiliation that avoided spilling royal blood and satisfied the Mongol law. The city that had stood for 500 years was reduced to rubble in less than 3 weeks. That is the part of the story the textbooks sanitize. They mention the fall of Baghdad. They mention the library, but they never connect the dots. The Mongols did not destroy Baghdad because they were savages who hated civilization. They destroyed Baghdad because the Caliph rejected a rational deal. It was business. It was a system. And the system demanded that every city that chose resistance receive the same fate, so that the next city would make the smarter choice. It was terror as governance, and it worked. But the Mongol siege machine had a hidden vulnerability, one that even Genghis never fully solved. It depended entirely on mobility and local resources. When the army moved into the forests of Eastern Europe, they found timber that was different, harder to cut, harder to shape. When they reached the stone castles of the Teutonic Knights, they encountered walls built on bedrock, moats fed by rivers that could not be drained, and a climate that turned their counterweight trebuchets into frozen, useless lumps of wood and iron. The machine that had crushed China and Persia began to stall in the mud and snow of Poland and Hungary. The turning point came at the Battle of Legnica in the year 1241. But it was not the battle itself that mattered. The Mongols won that battle. They slaughtered a combined army of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic Knights in a single afternoon. But the victory was empty. The terrain made it impossible to pursue. The castles were too strong to besiege with the limited timber available, and the army was running out of time. The great Khan Ogedei had died, and every prince had to return to the steppe for the election of a new leader. The Mongol army pulled back from Europe, and the walls of the continent's stone fortresses remained standing. Some historians argue that the Mongol withdrawal saved Europe from complete conquest, but a closer look at the evidence suggests something more nuanced. The Mongols did not leave because they were defeated. They left because the cost-benefit calculation no longer worked. The forests were too dense, the castles too numerous, the logistics too heavy. It was not a military failure. It was an engineering constraint. The fortress had finally found a way to survive the siege, not by being stronger, but by being everywhere, scattered across a landscape that the Mongol supply lines could not sustain. You have seen the map of the Mongol Empire, the huge swath of red from Korea to Hungary. But look closer. Look at the edges. Everywhere the red stops, there is a forest, a mountain range, a desert, or a sea that the Mongol system could not solve. The fortress at the edge of the empire was not a stone wall. It was geography itself. That moment, when the unstoppable machine grinds to a halt against a forest and a river, that is the kind of detail they leave out of the classroom. Subscribe if you want to keep finding the hidden weak points that shaped every empire's edge, and comment with the name of a fortress or a landscape that you think would have stopped the Mongols cold. Let's see who knows their geography. So what does that mean for the one fortress that Genghis Khan could never crack? The answer is not what you expect. It was not a massive castle with 100-foot walls. It was not a city with an army of 100,000 defenders. It was a small, muddy, unremarkable fortification deep in the Caucasus Mountains, held by a people who did not fight the Mongol army. They simply did not exist to be defeated. The assassins of Alamut were different. They were a sect that did not build walls to keep the Mongols out. They built a network of fortresses hidden in the peaks of northern Persia, fortresses that could only be reached by paths that a horse could not climb. When the Mongols came, they found no army to fight, no city to besiege, no supply line to cut. They found only empty stone halls and silence. The assassins had evacuated every fortress before the Mongols arrived, melting into the villages and the mountain passes where the horsemen could not follow. For the first time, the Mongol siege machine had nothing to attack. There was no wall to breach, no gate to batter, no moat to fill. There was only the mountain, the wind, and the complete absence of a target. Genghis Khan had conquered every fortress that had dared to face him, but he could not conquer a fortress that refused to be a fortress. The lesson is still relevant today. The strongest wall is not the one made of stone. It is the one that does not exist until you need it. And the war that Genghis Khan won against 157 walls was the same war he lost against the assassins. A war of presence versus absence, of the visible versus the hidden. Every fortress has an answer. Some answers are made of stone, some are made of silence. The dust has settled over Alamut, but the silence there carries a different weight than the crash of trebuchet stones. It carries the sound of a strategy that outlasted every counterweight, every siege tower, every promise of tribute. The Mongols came. They pressed forward, and they found only echoes of a people who had already moved, already hidden, already become something the empire could not map. You think you understand military history when you study the great sieges, the walls that fell, the towers that burned. But the real lesson of the Mongol conquest is not about the 157 fortresses that fell. It is about the one that did not exist when it needed to survive. It is about the assassins who turned absence into armor, who understood that the fortress is not the stone, but the strategy behind it. If you have ever felt the weight of knowing that the system is stacked against you, that the walls are too high and the enemies too many, you understand the assassin choice. They did not build higher walls. They did not dig deeper moats. They simply refused to play by the rules that the Mongol war machine had perfected. And in that refusal, they became the only fortress that Genghis Khan could not break. The chroniclers who recorded the Mongol conquests wrote long lists of fallen cities, each name a stone in the empire's foundation. But they also recorded the absence, the mountain fortresses that yielded no battle, no treasure, no tribute. Those gaps in the list are the true monuments. They are the proof that the strongest defense is not the wall you see, but the absence the enemy cannot find. So when you walk through a city that has stood for 1,000 years, when you run your hand over a stone that has seen empires rise and fall, remember that the real strength of that stone is not in its height or its thickness. It is in the question that every fortress asks. The question that Genghis Khan answered 157 times, but that the assassins left unanswered. The question of what lies inside, not the stone, but the silence. And that silence is the lesson that outlasts every empire, every conquest, every fallen wall. It is the fortress that the human mind can build when the world demands a stand. It is the strength that does not need to be seen to be real. This is the kind of truth that sticks with you long after the video ends. The Mongols conquered 157 fortresses, but they never conquered silence. If you want to stay connected to the stories that change how you see walls and wars, subscribe. There is more hidden history waiting. And in the comments, share one word that sums up the assassin strategy for you. Alamut, silence, absence, or something else. I want to see what resonates. You see, this is the part that changes how you read every history book from now on. Because the Mongols did not fail at Alamut, they succeeded at everything they set out to do. And they still could not win against a fortress that refused to be found. The siege machine that had crushed China, Persia, and the edges of Europe hit a wall that was not made of stone, but of strategy. And that is the truth that the textbooks never teach you. They hand you the casualty numbers, the dates, the names of battles, and they call it history. But they leave out the pattern. They leave out the moment when the mightiest war machine in the medieval world stopped, not because it was defeated, but because it could not find anything to hit. The assassins did not beat the Mongols in a fair fight. They beat them by refusing to exist within the Mongol system of war. So the next time you face a wall that seems impossible to break, ask yourself not how to destroy it. Ask yourself whether you need to engage with it at all. Because the greatest victory in the history of siege warfare was not won by the army that broke the most stones. It was won by the people who understood that some battles are not fought with trebuchets and siege towers. They are fought with silence, with absence, with the courage to walk away from the fight and rebuild where the enemy cannot follow. The Mongols gave the world the formula for conquest. The assassins gave it the counter-formula for survival. And in the end, It was the counter-formula that outlasted the empire. The stone walls of Karakoram are dust now. The silence of Alamut still echoes in the mountain passes. That is the fortress that cannot be simplified. That is the strength that does not need to be seen to be real.